Some people spend their entire lives thinking they were thrown here, as if existence were a lottery and birth a coincidence. They grow up believing that everything is random. The parents they had, the paths they crossed, the mistakes they made. But what if none of that were random? What if before you were born, you had actively participated in all of this? What if every part of your life, even the most difficult ones, had been chosen by you, not to suffer, but to grow? This idea, as strange as it may seem to the mind, is one of the oldest in the spiritual history of humanity. In fact, before continuing, if this has awakened something in you, a memory, a question, or a feeling that this information was already known within you, then breathe, feel, and consider leaving a like and subscribing. This helps this space reach more people who are also ready to remember. In the teachings of the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Garuda Purana, and very ancient tantric texts, there's a silent certainty. The spirit chooses its own life before incarnating. And this choice does not happen in the midst of chaos. It is made in total consciousness. In the state between lives, the soul enters a field of absolute clarity. There, conflicts do not exist, time is not a line, and feelings are not masked. What exists is pure understanding. It is at this point that the spirit contemplates its trajectory, recognizes unresolved issues, and defines the next steps. But this process is not done alone. There are presences there, higher consciousnesses, which in many traditions are called mentors, instructors, devas, or guides, help the spirit to observe more deeply. They show repetitive patterns, unresolved traumas, and untapped potential. And then, together, they analyze what needs to be experienced for the soul to advance to the next level. The spirit then chooses the place where it will be born, the type of family that will welcome it, the main encounters that will be part of its path. Yes, even those that will cause pain. Because, contrary to what the human mind tends to believe, those who hurt you are not always against you. Sometimes they are serving your awakening. This choice is made out of love for evolution, not out of masochism. The soul does not want to suffer, but it understands that there are lessons that can only be learned through experience. Certain emotions, such as true forgiveness, deep detachment, and real empathy, can only be developed when one crosses over into the shadows. That is why Earth is one of the most challenging and, at the same time, most valuable places in spiritual existence. Here, everything is intense. Here, everything touches us deeply. Because here, emotions have substance, time is tight, and relationships demand truth. And there is yet another profound detail in this spiritual plane. No one reincarnates alone. The soul is accompanied by a group, a set of consciousnesses that meet again life after life. Not out of dependence, but out of affinity, spiritual contract, shared mission. These soul groups are dynamic. In one life, someone may be your father. In another, your son. In another, a love. In another, an adversary. The roles change, but the connection remains. And that explains why, sometimes, a seemingly ordinary encounter touches us so deeply. Or why certain relationships are so intense from the beginning, for better or for worse. The presence of these souls on your path is part of your plan. Together, you arrange encounters, themes, turning points. And when you arrive on Earth, you all forget. Because it is precisely this forgetting that makes the experience real. Imagine living a movie knowing the ending, knowing every scene. It would lose its impact, wouldn't it? The soul understands this. That is why it accepts forgetting. It knows that sooner or later it will begin to remember. Through signs, intuitions, encounters, experiences that seem like coincidence, but are pure spiritual memory coming back to the surface. And perhaps, at this moment, something is coming back to you. A kind of recognition that does not come from reason, but from feeling. If this is the case, write in the comments, "I am remembering." Sometimes saying it out loud is all the soul needs to take the next step. But how does all this connect with our daily lives? In practice, every situation brings the chance to remember who you are. Every challenge can be a mirror of what you came to heal. When a relationship frustrates you, it may be an invitation to restore your self-esteem. When a loss leaves you feeling empty, it may be the beginning of letting go. When everything seems stuck, it may be life asking you to take a new direction. And that doesn't mean that everything has been planned down to the last detail. The plan exists, but it is flexible. Free will is real. You can ignore the signs. You can repeat patterns. You can postpone learning. But you can also change everything at any time. All it takes is a new choice made consciously. That's when destiny ceases to be a prison and becomes a bridge. What you've experienced so far doesn't define you. The plan your soul chose wasn't a sentence. It was a map. And maps can have multiple paths to the same destination. What's more, the spiritual guides who were with you during the planning are still around. Even if you can't see them, they communicate through symbols, dreams, sensations, people, words spoken in unexpected conversations. And the more you listen, the clearer the journey becomes. The connection with them does not require ritual. It requires presence, inner silence, respect for what you feel, even when you can't explain it. Because that's how the spirit speaks, subtly. If you've made it this far, there's a reason. Because few remain until the end of a message like this. And when they do, it's because they're ready to remember. So remember, you chose to be here. Now, with this mind, this body, this story, and more importantly, you can choose again. If this content touched you, share it with someone who is ready to remember too. Write in the comments, "I am remembering," and notice what happens in the coming days. And if you feel that this space is part of your path, sign up. Every piece of content here is a reminder disguised as words. Some decisions are made in silence, even before a body exists. The spirit, in the interval between one life and another, contemplates its own path with a clarity that here on earth seems impossible. In this formless space, it feels no hurry, no guilt, no comparison. It feels direction. It feels purpose. And it is in this state of consciousness that it chooses the contours of the next journey. The setting, the main challenges, the pains that still need to be understood, the relationships that will bring growth. And most importantly, it chooses to forget because it knows that real learning only happens when you live with your heart. Before moving on, a gentle reminder. If this content is making you reflect on things you've never stopped to think about, consider leaving a like and turning on notifications. Sometimes a small gesture like this is what brings this message to someone who is ready to awaken. Although the spiritual choice is conscious, life in the material world is dynamic. Nothing here is rigid. What the spirit plans before birth is a proposal, not a sentence. It defines themes, not details. It defines the why, not the how. This gives the soul precious space, free will. Free will does not negate the soul's plan. It complements it. It allows each lesson to be experienced in 1,000 different ways. A person who came to learn forgiveness may experience this through abandonment, betrayal, misunderstanding, or even loss. The plan is learning. You choose the plot at each step. This means that destiny is not fixed, is flexible. And anyone who thinks that the paths are all mapped out is mistaken. What is mapped out is the opportunity. The result depends on the response. When you resist what you feel, when you repeat old patterns out of fear or pride, life becomes repetition. Not because you are being punished, but because the learning is not yet complete. On the other hand, when you act with awareness, when you choose with your heart, new paths open up. The original plan is updated. The soul vibrates. The universe responds. That is why life is not a straight line. It is a spiral. You can go through the same pain in different ways until it is no longer necessary. Each turn in the cycle is a chance to do things differently, to do better. And this happens all the time. Every situation is a mirror. It shows something unresolved, an emotional pattern, an old wound, an ancestral fear. When you embrace this with awareness, the mirror shatters. The experience stops repeating itself. The spirit is grateful. But why do we forget all this? Why do we arrive here without remembering the plan? Because remembering everything would nullify the value of choice. Forgetting is the veil that protects learning. It is what makes every emotion, every attempt, every failure real. If you knew from the beginning that everything is part of a plan, there would be no truth in feeling. Pain would be endured with coldness. Love would be lived with calculation. Life would lose the taste of surprise. That is why the spirit chooses to forget, not out of weakness, but out of courage. The courage to remember everything little by little, feeling it in your skin. The courage to lose yourself in order to find yourself more deeply. The courage to trust, even without guarantees. And this forgetting is not total. It is partial, because the spirit leaves traces. Little reminders scattered throughout life for when you are ready. A dream that touches you deeply. A phrase that seems like an answer. A book that arrives at the right time. An encounter that turns things around. A synchronicity that defies logic. These are ways for the soul to whisper, you are on the right path. And the more you listen, the more you connect with the frequency of the original plan. And the more you align yourself, the more life flows with meaning. That is why some people go through such intense transformations after a crisis. Because it is precisely at the moment of breakdown that the soul finds space to emerge. Control gives way. The ego surrenders, and the memory begins to return. In this process, you may even feel alone, but you are never alone. Beyond your spiritual group, those souls who came with you, there are more subtle, higher presences that are constantly by your side. Some call them guides, others mentors, angels, devas, masters. The name doesn't matter. What matters is that they are there always. They do not interfere, but they watch, they guide, they suggest. Sometimes they send signs. Other times they just wait, because their respect for your freedom is absolute. But if you open yourself up, if you ask with a sincere heart, they respond. Not with words, but often. And maybe you've already felt this. That feeling that someone is near. That a decision was intuited. That something invisible protected you. These moments are not an illusion. They're touches from the invisible on your path. Life is full of these touches. But to perceive them, you need to slow down. Be silent. Be present. Because the spirit speaks in the interval. In the pause between thoughts. In the space between expectations. The more you listen to yourself, the more you hear what is beyond. And in that listening, understanding often comes. Certain pains were necessary. Certain people really had to leave. Certain losses came to clean up what you wouldn't let go of on your own. And then, what once seemed unfair becomes understanding. What seemed like tragedy becomes transformation. If this has happened to you, if you have gone through a painful situation and then realize that it has transformed you deeply, comment below. I've been there. You may inspire someone who is in the middle of the process right now. It's important to remember, the soul's plan is not a burden. It's an invitation, and you're not stuck with it. You're being called by it, but you can refuse, postpone, or modify it. Spiritual time does not run like ours. The soul does not rush. It waits until you're ready. And when you are, the next step always reveals itself. And if you are here, now, reading this, maybe you are ready. In fact, if this content has brought you clarity or relief, if it has touched you deeply, share it with someone else. Sometimes what you send from the heart reaches those who need it most. When the spirit understands itself, everything takes on a new perspective. The body ceases to be a limitation and becomes a temple. Life ceases to be random and becomes a journey. Others cease to be threats and become mirrors. You begin to see meaning where before there was only pain. You begin to recognize purpose in the pauses, in the cycles, in the twists and turns that life takes. And then anxiety dissolves. Fear loses its power. Haste turns into presence. The spirit knows that everything has its time, that every step has its value, that there is no delay when you're learning. Mistakes become tools. Doubt becomes a bridge. Chaos becomes a school. This change in perspective is not magic. It is vibrational. It is the result of looking at life through the eyes of the soul, not through the eyes of the wound. And the more you do this, the more your external reality reflects your internal state. Because the world around you is only a reflection of what you are choosing to sustain within. And you can choose, right now, to support something new. Like this video if you felt that call. Comment, "I've been there," if any part of your story has been transformed by pain, and subscribe to continue activating your spiritual memory, because it's closer than you think. You may never have realized it, but life has always spoken to you. In every unexpected silence, in every pain that seemed without reason, there was a message, an invisible code that did not come to punish, but to awaken. Because the spirit is not here to be broken. It is here to remember who it is. No challenge appears by chance. No separation is empty. No loss comes without reason. Everything is part of a great process of refinement of the soul. Existence does not want you to suffer. It wants you to see yourself. And that's why it uses everything. Joy, love, fear, confusion. It turns everything into a mirror. It shows you exactly where there is still resistance. It points out the parts that need light. And when you start to see life through these eyes, everything changes. Pain becomes a lesson. Chaos becomes a tool. Doubt becomes a bridge. In fact, if this content has already made you see something that previously seemed confusing, take the opportunity to enjoy it and subscribe. Sometimes, the clarity you have now may reach someone who needs it, and you can be that channel. The physical world is both the most challenging and the most valuable field of the spiritual journey. Because here, everything is intensified. Duality is profound. Time is short. Uncertainty is constant. But that is exactly why Earth is so special. Because this is where the soul tests itself, expands, reveals itself. And even though life seems hard at times, it is not against you. It is trying to bring you back inside, to the center, to the point where remembrance happens. But what about when the body ends? What happens when the physical cycle ends? The truth is that nothing really ends. The spirit just changes planes. It crosses over. It returns to the field of pure consciousness. And there, without the weight of the body, it sees with total clarity. Not with judgment, with understanding. This moment is known in various traditions as the between lives state. A space where time does not pass and the spirit rests. But it is not a passive rest. It is a profound review of the journey just lived. During this review, the soul revisits its trajectory. It feels again the effects of its actions, not just what it did, but what it caused. It realizes the impact it left on each person, each word, each choice. This is not a punishment. There is no court. There is no condemnation. There is only reflection, the recognition of what still needs to be integrated. It is at this moment that the spirit understands where it strayed from the original plan, where it resisted its own truth, where it postponed what was already ready. And then it decides what needs to come now. This decision does not come from fear or obligation. It comes from the desire to grow, to complete what is still missing. to illuminate what is still dark. That is why the soul returns. It reincarnates. It chooses once again, with awareness, with courage. But is this cycle eternal? No. There's a point of arrival, a final state, and it is known by many names. Moksha, Nirvana, Mukti, Atmasakshakar, liberation. But they all point to the same truth, the end of the cycle of birth and death. This state is not a physical place. It is a frequency, a level of consciousness so high that it no longer requires incarnation. The spirit becomes whole, complete. There is no more attachment. There is no more fear. There is no more separation. The liberated spirit does not need to return, but sometimes it chooses to, out of compassion, out of love, out of service. These are the great masters, those who return not to learn, but to remember, and to remind us. They do not ask for worship. They ask for presence. They do not demand obedience. They invite awareness. They look us in the eyes and say, even without words, "You're what you seek. You always have been." And maybe, if you've made it this far, you're starting to feel it. Not as an idea, but as a memory. Something inside you is saying, "I always knew." Because, in fact, you always knew. You just forgot. And now, it's coming back. At this point in the journey, the question is no longer, who am I? But what am I going to do with what I know? Because remembering brings responsibility. When you remember that you chose your life, that nothing is by chance, that everything has a purpose, you can no longer live on autopilot. You start choosing with more intention, loving more deeply, forgiving more easily, because you understand that the other person is also trying to remember, that everyone carries their own pain, their own veils, their own agreements. You begin to recognize your soul group, those glances that transcend time, those connections that defy logic. You understand that each person had a role to play, and that perhaps the most important role was to bring you face to face with your own light. And in that recognition, healing happens. Silently, gradually, the soul aligns with its essence. And external life begins to reflect that. Cycles come to an end. Conflicts dissolve. Answers arrive. But not because you memorized some technique or followed some step-by-step guide, but because you remembered. In fact, if this content is awakening something in you, share it with someone who is in the process. Sometimes a phrase can activate an entire memory. From that memory, you begin to live with a different perspective. You see beauty in the simple things. You see meaning in waiting. You see wisdom in silence. Haste turns into confidence. Rigidity turns into surrender. You understand that you no longer need to fight against life, because life is your ally. It is on your side. It always has been. It pushes you when you resist, but it cradles you when you trust. And it is this trust that takes you to the next level of the journey. When you stop trying to control everything and start walking with what you feel. When you understand that the soul's plan does not need to be known, but recognized. That's how new chapters begin. Not with a big external revelation, but with an internal whisper, go. This is the way. And when you hear that whisper and follow it, everything changes. If this reminder touched you, write in the comments, "I am what I am looking for." If you felt that this content took you to a more authentic place, leave a like. And if you want to follow this path with us, subscribe. Because here, every video is a reminder, and every reminder is a key. This space is not just made of words. It is made of memory, of awareness, of frequency. And now you know, the journey does not begin with birth, nor does it end with death. The journey begins when you remember.